Oh, welcome everybody. It is Thursday night. It's 8 p.m. Central Time, which means it is What If He Doesn't Survive? We're going to be talking about Chapter 21 of The Mandalorian, Season 3, Episode 5. We're just over the halfway point. And Jeff York, the Establishing Shot, my dear friend and co-host this evening. I've been seeing a lot of stuff online, and I think even our friend David Fowley posted something in our private Facebook chat, like an article about basically not is Star Wars dead, but is the Mandalorian suffering from the greater Star Wars franchise? Like, is it becoming too entangled in this wider mythos and kind of losing sight of what it is? I think there's an argument to be made there for sure, but my question is, what's wrong with that? I especially this episode, I felt like it was the perfect marriage of returning to what is great about the Mandalorian, what we loved about it in the first episodes of like space action, Mandalorian bounty hunters blowing stuff up and getting into cool adventures, and also kind of low-key expanding the Star Wars universe and building to something greater. I thought this was possibly my favorite episode of the season. What do you think? And eventually we'll tell everybody what the episode's about. I'm assuming you've watched it because this is a spoiler. Wait, hold on a second. I got to prove it. This is a spoiler show.
There you go. That's right.
So Jeff, what did you think?
Well, it's funny. I watched it and I really liked it. I agree with you. I think it's one of the better episodes this season. And I think it's now, as we talked a little bit about last week, starting to coalesce together, and you're seeing where this is going. They're setting up the return of Moff Gideon. They've got a number of sort of hands on deck now. It's about sort of these collection of good guys coming together. The Mandalorians are no longer rogue agents, but they're becoming more and more of a community, more on the side of fighting for a bigger cause than just their own sort of selfish needs in their cult or planet or whatever. It's certainly setting Boca up as a big deal. My God, she takes her helmet off at the end and lets everybody know, there's pretty Katie Sackhoff underneath there. Let's see more of her, because for the fanboys, we don't see enough of the pretty people in this show. It's just a lot of metal heads going, very barely shaking, very stoic. But then I read a number of complaints, and even some of the people in our chat were sort of bitching about this out. So I'm not sure how you please people. I think for me, it was keeping the themes that I like and sort of that low but slow, steady build that you just referenced towards, I think, something that is going to be bigger and more dramatic in the next 3 remaining episodes. But my God, this to me felt the most like Star Wars in many respects of the series so far this year, and maybe took it back to some of the favorite episodes that people loved about it in the last 2 seasons, where it felt very much like a Star Wars episode. There are times I think when the lighting is a little too bright, it almost looks like we're at Disney World in the Star Wars village, and we're, they're doing the parade and stuff. They could darken that and color correct a little bit. Yet, there was a lot of action in this. The battle scene with Gorian Shard attacking was exciting, and you could see what was going on and where the action was happening, and so I thought this one to me struck the right balance of the themes of maturity and family and becoming part of something bigger than just sort of selfish concerns, but also playing very much like traditional fun Star Wars with action and adventure and some mystery and all of those things coming together in a pretty deft 41-minute episode.
Very much so. Mark, I apologize. I don't know how long you were hanging out down there in the green room.
Not long. No, I have a little time yet before I get my son from work, so I figured I'd pop in and say hi. So,
hey. Mark the Movie Lorian, also known as Mark the Movie Man.
Hello.
In the spoiler room. I want to get your introduction out of the way just in case you have to pop out.
I got at least like 15-20 minutes, so it's good. So we're good.
Okay. So we're just kind of talking about, I don't know how much you heard or saw, but, Jeff and I were both kind of gushing over the episode. We think it's really strong. And one of the things I want to talk about tonight is the controversy over, is this too Star Wars and not enough Mandalorian, if that makes sense. But just overall, what do you think of this episode, The Pirate?
I was with Jeff. I caught what Jeff was saying quite a bit. You know what? He's right. There you go, Jeff. You can feel you are.
Thank you.
You're right.
The check will be in the mail tomorrow.
You
snail mail, but still you'll get it.
What made me happy about this, not only you're absolutely right, this feels the most Star Wars-y of Star Wars show, not just Mandalorian season 3, but of the last couple of Star Wars series we've got. This felt like a Star Wars from the banter to the way the characters were to the tone of it, to where it didn't get too light, but it didn't get too heavy either. It was a nice balance. You could see those components that had us kind of confused of why are we doing this are now starting to come into play. So it's delivering what Book of Boba Fett didn't, in that it teased a bunch of stuff and just laid flat. So you had a lot of cool stuff in here. The people rebelling against the pirates, Mandalorians and was it Navarro folks coming together. I had a lot of fun with this episode quite a bit. Everybody got a chance to shine, and it ends in a nice addition to the Bo-Katan story, which is what kind of is the sub story that they've been leading up to this whole time. Besides, we've had 2 seasons of Wolf and Cub, and now we've got we're building up Bo-Katan, which I'd like to see. So it touched on a lot of things, yet none of it felt forced. It all flowed into one another really well for once.
No, go please. Please.
I was just going to say, I think the word flow is perfect, because one of the criticisms I've seen lobbed against this season in particular is too much Grogu. This show isn't supposed to be about the cute puppet; it's supposed to be badass adventure. Grogu was in this episode, but he was not prominently highlighted. They put him kind of to the side and focused on other things, and it's the first time that I was kind of conscious of we don't really. He's a great character, and I like the dynamic and what he represents for the show. But it is nice to focus on the adults and the kind of the grander conspiracy. We got a lot of that a couple episodes ago with the kind of the backdoor pilot to the the Rise of the Empire show, or whatever they're going to call it. But yeah, I think this worked really well, and it also drove home something that bothered me about the first couple episodes of the show is. It's the idea of the Mandalorians living, kind of in this colony on a secluded planet, and they don't want to be found, but they don't have a homeworld anymore, so they're kind of regrouping as a society. That's a great idea, but it's just kind of weird to see them doing training exercises where they're wrestling and rolling around and stuff with their jetpacks on, or they're scaling a mountain to save, a kid from a baby bird. In this one, when they are doing the drop out of the ship into the city, and they're just sniping pirates, and it's yes, this is a callback to season 1 with the original attack on Navarro, which I thought was great, because now they're fighting alongside the people that formerly they had been hired to kill. It means so much, and it's just so freaking cool. Star Wars, I think, is cool again, which I didn't think I'd be able to say after certainly Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Well, to that point too, Ian, I think that Favreau does a really good job of making sure that he's not wasting scenes or lines of dialogue. They come back. A lot of the foreshadowing that we saw in the first 4 episodes came back in this one, including the pirates. Why are the pirates in there? Oh, to remind us that Jin was once sort of with them in the bar that's now a school. Yes, and they're going to come back and be nasty mother effers and try to do some damage and bring upon a great battle, sort of for the soul of the planet. I also think it's interesting too that, and I don't want to necessarily read this into the world around us, but I love the fact that the Mandalorians were sort of under the impression going into this season that I think that they could still sort of stay untouched by all the stuff that's going on with the Federation, not the the Jedi and the different groups and stuff.
The New
like
Republic,
that.
right?
The New Republic, rather.
Republic,
Excuse
yeah.
me, Federation. That's Star Trek. My friend, my I didn't mean to offend you.
You're gonna get us
Star
banned
Trek
from
people.
YouTube.
Sorry. Here we go. Anyway, I love both shows. What can I say? But I love the fact that this sort of episode said you can't really hide from it. You're involved in it, because if you sit and think that you're going to be immune from it and you don't have to take a stance, they will come and force you to take a side, and you may be the next person they want to trump all over. So I love just that kind of sense of, can you really be passive during a war? Can you really be neutral? No. And it's called Star Wars, so I think it's always a commentary on that as well. So it's coming together nicely. We'll see. There's 3 big episodes left. And one last thing I was just going to say about Grogu, which you brought up, is yes, he was less in this, but he's still in the cab with, with Jin and battling. So it's like, he's never really like just going like, oh, look what they're doing in my defense. It's like, he's a part of it. And I think at some point he's going to have to do something where he uses the things that he defeated the other groundling with, his Jedi mind tricks or skills, to help in some way. And that's one of the reasons that Favreau is setting up, is like, he's always close by. He's never really just a bystander.
Well, it's kind of like, and I just thought about this when you started talking about it. Like, it reminds me of, I don't know that it's as deep as that, but you think about the original, the
philosophy of Star Wars.
Well, no, I was like, you think about the original trilogy, you rarely saw Han Solo without Chewbacca. And that goes back to kind of the extended, canon of the life debt and all that stuff. I'm kind of getting that same feeling. Like, you always see Mando and Grogu together in the cockpit, just like you always saw Han and Chewie in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. They were inseparable until unfortunately they weren't in the sequel trilogy. Talking about kind of contemporary allegory, they come right up to the precipice and crack the door open with the scene where it was the Captain Carson Teva, played by Paul Sung Young Lee. Hope I pronounced his name right. Who we saw previously as sort of a New Republic X-wing cop who had kind of pulled Mando over and had let him go. I think it was like season 2, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's back now, and he finds out that there's trouble on Navarro. And he goes to, try and seek help, but there's so much bureaucracy, so much red tape with the New Republic that there's a backlog of planets and systems that need help, that they're like, well, you can't just come and ask us for, people to come and patrol and fight, folks. You got to put in a form and all this other stuff. But when he goes to meet with goes to like New Republic headquarters, I think it was on Coruscant. He actually meets with Tim Meadows, who plays a nice, bureaucrat who plays half the message that Grief Karga sends, the desperate message. He's like, look, you got to help it. Click,
I have no time for this. And he's a parody of the character that was the bureaucrat in Brazil too. Even named the name.
Right. Well, but my point is, he says, he starts to say, Navarro, oh, that's right. They weren't. They never became officially part of the New Republic territory, or they never signed with us.
Right.
And it brings to mind what's going on right now with the United Nations and Ukraine and Russia and all that. Like, if you don't if you don't sign up, then you go to the back of the list and possibly even fall off the list. But they don't make a huge point of it. It's just sort of a contemporary idea woven into this mythical story, and it works. And I love that. Katie O'Brien's Kane character is there in the background. Once again, with the last time we saw her, she was, frying the brains out of the doctor, right? But now she's essentially like working in the mailroom of the New Republic, but doing that thing which we talked about in that episode, which I loved, which is being insidious, like working her way and her influence, just like kind of whispering things into her ear, like, I don't think, there's nothing you can do to help that plan. I'm sorry. I think the director's right. Just to kind of sow those seeds of chaos. And also, as we find out at the end of the episode, there's a larger conspiracy at foot involving possibly rogue Mandalorians and the rescue of Moff Gideon from imprisonment. So, yeah. It's not the same Mandalorian show we started with 2 seasons ago, and I'm really happy about that, because I think this is becoming, I think he's going to be really important to the Star Wars mythos in a way that people hadn't thought he could be at the beginning. They thought, oh, it's gonna be a little Outer Rim adventure story or whatever. But I think it'd just be so cool if he was integral to what happens in the sequel trilogy, or setting that all up. And we just have no idea, or had no idea until now.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see where they play out with this. I did like what they laid the groundwork for here. You know, again, they were teasing throughout, and I was happy that we finally get a bit of payoff with Kane. We get a payoff, though. I will say, and I don't know if it's just the writers in general making our Star Wars characters dumb, and maybe I'm looking at nostalgia a little bit, but oh, look, a piece of Beskar metal. That must be the Mandalorians. Never mind, that Mandalore got raided, got pillaged, whatever. Oh, we get a little piece of Beskar metal. Well, are you saying it's the Mandalores? And he's like, no, I'm saying, if I was that guy, I mean, then they end credits. I'm like, I'd be the guy that said, no, I'm saying we have a piece of Beskar metal. I'm not saying we have Mandalorian.
But it's interesting because go ahead.
No, I understand that. I don't know. I don't have enough information, honestly, to comment, because I don't know how. Because even the Mandalorians didn't think there was anything left of Mandalore until they actually went there. So the idea, like, we know as the audience that there's still tons of ruins and stuff that could be, plundered. But as far as the galaxy knows, the planet was essentially turned to green glass by, a series of like TIE fighter or bomber nuclear blasts. So I understand where you're coming from, Mark, and I think that's the way it's going to play out. But my wife asked me about this. She's like, would Mandalorians team up with with the bad guys? And like, it's possible, because according to what little I know of the extended myths, the Mandalorians actually fought Jedi once upon a time.
Yeah.
So it's entirely possible that they might have, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But it's also possible, and I would say even likely, that there's a conspiracy to make it look like Mandalorians were involved.
Yeah, it just seems to be a trend, not just in this show, but lately. And maybe, as I've been consuming media here and there, that there seems to be a lot more of jumping to conclusion character things happening, not just in Mandalorian, but in a few other things, movies as well. It's like, oh, we have this one piece, must be this. And you're just like, well, you know what I'm saying? And
yeah,
but that could be a red herring, Mark, or it could be, a little bit arguably there for, I think, the younger audiences, just to make sure they're kind of keeping up with it. Because for every one of those kind of moves that you can say, well, that's either a really blatant red herring that they want us to think this over the next week that we have to ponder it, or it's something to make sure the kids understand that, well, I don't know what I'm really looking at here, but we're going to spoon feed you this little tidbit to help you understand it, and then they can go back and look up the connection to the Jedi but then they also turn around and they have like Kane come in, and suddenly she's there. We don't see any scene in the last couple of episodes where somehow we see her infiltrating or giving her pass key to get in. Suddenly she's just there, and so she's snuck into it, and off screen she's insinuated her into the inner realm of sort of the bureaucracy where she can have some sway. I love that. To me, that's very sophisticated storytelling that kind of belies some of the stuff that may be either red herrings or for the kids.
Right. And I didn't mind Kane showing up there. That made sense just from the way they set her up in the hour that we got to spend with her and her, the other character, with the doctor character. That made sense. It was just, for me, considering how long Mandalore had been glass, as you say, and they had a doctor that literally was dealing in Beskar metal. They had a guy, what I'm saying is they black market, they're dealing with Beskar metal. Now, mind you, the guard here on the speaker or whatever, who makes the jump to, oh, Mandalorians, I get that. I don't know. For me, I'm like, I hope they just, I don't necessarily want them to play the angle that, just for me, I'd like to say I've taken slightly different, more reserved angle than, oh no, all the Mandalores they busted Gideon out, which wouldn't, if you take a beat, doesn't make a whole lot of sense for even in their world if they had anyone paying attention. And maybe that's the angle they're playing on how the First Order builds up is the bureaucracy they keep playing back at with Coruscant and the New Republic becoming blind to things because they are mismanaging the universe.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Mark. But I mean, to go back to the whole like Beskar armor thing, I don't know how much, because we as the audience are privy to a lot of information about
True.
what's really going on in the show. I don't know that an X-Wing pilot and the guy on the dispatch radio are going to have the insight to say, you know, oh, there may be something else to this other than, you know, it's
This is what it appears to be.
right. I mean, it's
Right.
I'm trying to think of an analogy that won't get us pulled off YouTube. let's just say you see a recognizable hate symbol, you know, tacked to someone's door. You could be like, well, it could be the neighbor kid playing a prank. It could be, you know, there's someone bad in the neighborhood. Either one is plausible, but your initial instinct is probably going to be there's, you know,
well, does it create a better question? Does it create a better question for you, Mark? Does it create a question like, okay, let's say it is exactly what it appears to be. It isn't a red herring, and maybe it's there for all of us to understand. But who is that then? Who's the traitor within the cast of characters of the people we've seen already, and who's, you know, playing both sides against the middle or whatever? That becomes a more interesting question than, wait a minute, are they trying to indict all of the Mandalorians here? Well, you know, they did have this history with the Jedi. I think it's showing most of the Mandalorians are moving in this direction now, but there's maybe a couple of bad eggs or one or two, just like Ilia Lane is still around there, you know, not being converted into the better side. So are those the kind of, it reminds me a little bit of, again, I sort of mixed metaphors here, but Star Trek 5, or 6, The Undiscovered Country.
Okay, don't say 5, say 6. Yeah,
6, where there were,
even if you're talking about 5, say 6.
Yeah, I meant 6. How dare I say 5? The worst of them, for sure. Captain Kirk's direction. Oh boy.
Sorry.
Anyway, but I mean, you know, where you've got people from the Federation working with the Klingons to keep war going because they didn't want to have peace in their lifetime, and détente, which was sort of the metaphor for America and Russia, was more interesting to build up the power and the defenses and all that, knowing that there was a war effort as opposed to a peace effort.
Well, I'm gonna, okay, if we go that angle, let's explore that, because I'm coming up with an idea for a podcast, and so this kind of plays into that. Okay, so let's play this. Then who is it? I'd say it's not anyone amongst their ranks because they don't have a ship. We're gonna go back to Tatooine because it's Boba Fett. Boba Fett helped Gideon. Boba Fett get Gideon.
Nah, he's trying for this straight and narrow nonsense and being the mayor of Tatooine or whatever the hell. I don't think he's interested in any of this.
We're gonna go back to Tatooine. We're going back to Tatooine.
Look, here's the thing though. I'm not gonna let Mando off the hook, because for as much as like, hey, we're not on Tatooine anymore, we are spending an awful lot of time on these beige rock planets now. It's like, you didn't like sand? How about some rocks? I'm like, no. I'd rather have an entire Coruscant set TV show than, you know, I don't need to see any more beachscapes.
I know they like the idea of the double sun, but do we need that much light on any scene?
Yeah, right.
It's to represent the fight against the darkness or something. I don't know.
I guess.
What with all the really cool, interesting bits that they throw in this episode, for me, I think what really meant a lot, I thought, I don't know if anybody else pick up on the evolution of your Mandalorian philosophy, but the whole thing with Bo-Katan and the armorer, you know, that the way this thing ends with her showing up and standing next to her and saying, yeah, she bridges both. I'm like,
yeah,
I loved how they did that, because I'm like, cool. One, we get to see Katie Sackhoff, but two, you know, it shows that they have to evolve if they're going to survive. And the whole idea of you must keep your mask off on just is an old way that they can't hang on to anymore. And the fact that you have, of all people, the one who literally told Mando, yeah, no, fuck off, pardon my French, but go get you. Yeah, I know you got the saber, but you took your helmet off. I don't care. Go get the hell out of here. You know, and now she's like, no, take your helmet off, standing next to Bo-Katan and saying, we got to get all our clans together, which by them saying that there's other clans out there doesn't mean anybody in this inner circle was involved in Gideon escaping. We've got other Mandos out there, which is going to add the conflict between joining the clans, especially if she goes to go, hey, you guys want to join? Hey, is that Moff Gideon?
He's our newest foundling. No, it's interesting because maybe we're coming at it from the same angle, Mark, but maybe I have a different tack with Bo-Katan taking her helmet off and having the support of the armor to go out and try and find these, the remnants of the Mandalorians. I don't see it necessarily as an endorsement, like we're changing our ways, like big picture, but it's a small step to say, like, if what's really important is preserving our people and our culture, the idea that, because not everybody who's, a Mandalorian, as we've seen with Bo-Katan and her tribe, adheres to the old ways. We're going to try and build some bridges here. And what I thought was one of the more interesting parts of this is Greef Karga, after the Mandalorians help rescue the planet, essentially a planet that seems to be, frankly, a town. I mean, I'm always kind of amused, like when someone swoops in and like, hey, you saved our town. It's like, you saved the entire planet. Like, the planet's a big place, right? It's not.
They're aiming at the civilians, all 17 of them.
Right. But my greater point is I have no concept of how big this area is, but he's like, from the seas of whatever to the mountains of whatever, this is now officially belongs to the Mandalorians for generations to come. I thought that's a really interesting idea. Are they going to use this as a staging ground to go rebuild Mandalore, if that's possible? Are they planting possible problems in the future of, if this planet grows larger in different populations, could there be conflict? Like, hey, we need to expand. Sorry, you've got your territory that Greef Karga granted you 200 years ago. You can't, I guess I'm getting to like a weird Israeli-Palestine metaphor. But when I saw that kind of a setup, again, I don't know if they're going to do anything with this story, but it leads to other possibilities, other stories you could tell in this galaxy far, far away, which it doesn't have to be a backdoor pilot. It's just, it lit up my imagination for a couple of minutes, and I really liked that.
Well, I think if anything, Favreau is probably knowing we're in the middle of the Ukraine war and what's going on with, do we stand with NATO? Who's against that? Who, showing up, being part of what you believe in freedom and democracy, without being super heavy-handed about it. I think he's making comments about it. Again, if there's anything that I think sometimes gets lost in the Star Wars milieu, is the idea of war. And, you can't really be neutral during war. I mean, not anymore, not in this day and age, and maybe not in the galaxies. And I think the idea of adjusting, changing, making those small steps that either, participate in the bigger picture of a battle or a war, or just strike a blow for people joining the organization, people becoming sort of that community again. I think that's all very much part of this. And I think that's some of that appeal for the adults watching with their kids. The kids are like, oh, this creature's cool and this fight was cool, and isn't Baby Yoda, as everybody loves to call him, the cutest thing. But it's like, no, Grogu is more complex than that. And I think adults will pick up on that. I think that the war symbolism and commentary is there for those older audience members too. And I think Favreau is kind of nicely straddling it for all four quadrants, if you will. There's appeal for just the action adventure audience that loves it, and then there's stuff that's a little bit more in the realm of science fiction, which is always commentating on modern society, whether it was Star Trek, Star Wars, or Rod Serling.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. What I think part of that, I could see that, especially with given history, Star Wars past, with parallel using metaphor and allegory and such to reflect real world events, but also it's the Western vibe of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Now you've got this band of, say, this clan, this tribe of folks who have been put out from their original land. Well, now we're giving you this land to settle. You used to be our enemies, we're our friends. Now you've got these two cultures living next to each other. So now there's a lot of stuff you can play with and still stay in that kind of Western vibe of, Mandalorians, Native American, indigenous people, you could say that
Sure.
kind of parallel that you would get in a Western. And how does that conflict? Or maybe Navarro becomes, there was a great run of comics near the end of when I was collecting them in the 90s called Mosaic with Green Lantern, to where it was I forgot the name of the Green Lantern who ended up being put in charge. And basically Mosaic, it was after an event, a number of different cultures ended up getting to put on this planet that got pieced together from other planets. So there's all these different cultures and he became the watcher of that planet. So maybe Navarro becomes that, to where you have other refugees or something showing up, or other cultures, and they make it accepted. Okay, you could have this land over here, and now you've got all these different cultures living, and now you've got to set up for another show with different.
Well, but you bring something up really interesting, Mark. Is Grief Karga was in a previous episode, and then even in this episode was kind of crowing about how we're out of the Empire is no longer a thing. The New Republic can't really touch us because they're too busy doing other things. So we're our own independent kind of entity, and we can do whatever we want. That's great until you get these security concerns, like with a pirate raid.
Right.
So it kind of, it becomes a double-edged sword. So you're right. What if this, given what happens with the Mandalorians, could this become a haven for similarly, displaced people in the greater, war against the Galactic Empire that they're recovering from? Or could this become a thing where, not to say that it was a manipulation, but maybe just a side benefit? Now he's got an army of, the galaxy's most badass, warriors as security for this planet that is suddenly, if people find out about it, they'll be like, yeah, let's go set up there on Navarro. It seems like they've got a lot of space and very few inhabitants. One thing that struck me is one of you mentioned the phrase indigenous people. We don't know that much about Navarro, I don't think. I know it's been in previous episodes, but again, it's an entire planet. Do Grief Karga and his people, can they lay claim to that to that planet or whatever? Are there other factions somewhere else that might have an issue of like, what do you mean you gave all this land to these to these bounty hunters or Mandalorians?
Just to let you know, it was John Stewart was the Green Lantern for that one.
It was great that he rebounded after the Daily Show. I'm just so happy.
No, I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead. But
no, I was going to say, I think you've also both hit on that. This is, I think, Favreau being shrewd about making sure that this series continues to go on. And I think the best thing about the offshoots, whether it's movies like Rogue One or this, is that I think you have to find other factions in the galaxy to explore and make hay out of. It's the only way it's going to survive, because you can't keep telling the story about Anakin over and over again. And, there's other multitudes of characters that were created for the books and the comics that have yet to be sort of capitalized on the big or small screen. So this is laying groundwork for that. Like, if to your point about, is this like, I love what you said, Ian, is this sort of like the Palestinians living next to their sworn enemy, the Israelis? Or, is it like Anwar Sadat when he made the peace talks with Menachem Begin back in the late 70s? Maybe that's an interesting faction of the galaxy too, as opposed to just always the Jedi, just always, the remnants of the Empire. And there are other possible enemies that are maybe even more nuanced or more in the gray area, not quite the black and white of the previous Star Wars movies that tended to paint it that way.
And it also brings up a point, and I don't know if anybody writing Star Wars is even thinking along these lines, but it's just raising kind of cool questions in this episode. We're talking, I brought up Israel, Palestine. That's a small, that's a relatively small piece of land on a planet. What does a land dispute mean in the context of the galaxy, where you could just ostensibly pack up your entire civilization and move to a place that no one's even heard of before? If there's an inhabitable planet, I don't know how to tell those stories necessarily, but it opens up all these different possibilities. These big ideas seem like they're more in the realm of Star Trek, which is science fiction, rather than Star Wars, which is kind of science fantasy. But it'd be nice to see someone really go into these things. I think they have kind of in some of the TV shows. Like, I want to close out with this because we got to go to our John Wick Chapter 4 live stream, which is coming in just a few minutes. We do get a really surprising, fun cameo early on from Zeb from the TV show Rebels. He is in that space bar talking to our Captain Carson. And I recognized the alien. I'm like, oh, it's another one of those. But then it was the voice. I'm like, that's Zeb. And I haven't watched all of Rebels, so I have no idea how all of this connects. But there was talk that a couple of I think Ezra is supposed to show up in this series, or maybe in Ahsoka. So it's just nice to see them planting these seeds, and not just like, hey, look, it's a big swashbuckling cameo. It's a background detail. So yeah, I feel like they're really, unlike Obi-Wan, unlike Boba Fett, which seemed like contrary to the characters and just like kind of aimless. It really feels like whether it sound terrible, whether the fans like it or not, I feel like the creators of this season in particular are really trying to set things up that are going to be rewarding for people who are into the deeper lore than just like, hey, let's go blow some stuff off in cool armor.
And I think to those Star Wars fans who have been anxious for the appeal of the books and the comics, telling different stories, using different characters, even the animated series, advancing the storytelling into farther reaches of the galaxy. Again, I liked Obi-Wan, but the fact that it was so much still about the middle area, which isn't quite as interesting when it ties really into Anakin as much, knowing that they keep exhausting that. And I know that's the big franchise character, et cetera, et cetera. But this kind of stuff buoys me because it's showing that there are plenty of different species and characters and lands and places, even if they tangentially connect to all that, great, but they can be their own story. And I think it sets up fascinating potential versions of wars, Star Wars, or conflicts at the very least, that can sustain this series far beyond just Luke and Darth Vader.
Yeah, very well said. Mark, I know you got to get out of here, and I think we're going to close up shop a few minutes early so I can refresh my coffee and get ready to talk about John Wick.
Sure.
But do you have any closing thoughts on Mando's episode 5, season 3?
This episode revitalized my interest in this. I was worried it was going to do another Boba Fett angle, and it didn't. To your point, Jeff, Book of Boba Fett had an opportunity to explore the syndicate crime organization of the galaxy, and instead they turned it into what it was. There was an opportunity for it to explore the Hutt families, how organized crime is taking sides with either rebels or the Empire, because as you say, no one can really stay neutral eventually in a war, even in Star Wars, especially the galaxy. Someone eventually falls on one side or the other. So that would have been interesting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the last few episodes of Mando.
Excellent. Well, me too. And I'm looking forward to next week when we will be back talking about episode 6, or I guess episode 22 of the entire saga.
Right.
So yeah, join us back here next week at 8 p.m. Central. We'll be talking What If He Doesn't Survive? Mandalorian weekly live recaps. Yeah, we'll also talk about like where is this leading for Star Wars and fan interest and all that good stuff. I also I'm announcing this now. I don't think I've asked my fellow critics really, but I'm just going to do it and see if anyone shows. I'm going to do a Dungeons and Dragons companion live stream after next week's episode. That should be very interesting.
What a surprise! Oh my!
Hey,
God.
look.
If you fanboys aren't showing up every week for this series, you are robbing yourself of joy. Kicking the seat, kicking yourself for missing it.
Oh, I like that.
Nice.
But so yeah, I'm gonna get out of here, guys. Thanks so much. And for those who are watching, check out the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel. There will be a link up there in the live streams tab for our John Wick Chapter 4 discussion, which will be starting off in about 6 minutes or so. I got to reheat my coffee and empty out my previous coffee, if you know what I'm saying. But yeah, in the meantime, thanks everybody. Thank Jeff York for the establishing shot. Mark the Movie Man Krawczak of the Spoiler Room Productions, and yeah. Thanks, gang. Good night. Like and subscribe. Follow all of Earth's Mightiest Critics. Their information is down below. And as always, may the force be with you.
Always.